Has America once again been pulled into a war in the Middle East? And how does the United States strike on Iran change politics in the entire region? These are two of many questions that linger in the aftermath of Trump's decision to enter Israel's conflict with Iran. Joining me to discuss are Richard Haass, President Emeritus at the Council on Foreign Relations, who writes a terrific newsletter on Substack called Home and Away, and retired Admiral James Stavridis. He was NATO's Supreme Allied Commander for Europe and is a partner at the Carlyle Group. He serves on the board of advisors of a handful of defense-related companies. Richard, let me ask you, to me, the big picture, in a sense, is when you look at that rise in centrifuges and over the years, I think the way the Israelis see this is, look, the Iranians have been playing footsie with going nuclear for a long time. 15 years ago, maybe we had to put up with it, and the best we could hope for was deterrence. We're now so strong, we don't need to put up with that. We're going to take this battle to the enemy. We're going to destroy as much as we can. Why did the United States join in?
I think you're right about Israel, by the way. They, given particularly the demise of Hezbollah in many ways, they had a window. For us, though, this is a classic war of choice. We didn't have to do what we did. We certainly didn't have to do it when we did. The president could have let it play out. It was not an act of preemption. What Iran had was a gathering threat, not an imminent threat. So the United States had remarkable discretion. President, when he spoke last night, Fareed, he didn't make it clear. Was there anything new? Like, for example, were the Iranians carting away all the centrifuges and the enriched uranium to some other place? If so, he didn't mention it. Does he think they were on the brink of having a weapon? So I actually think he's made not just a big political gamble, but a strategic gamble. Taking a step back, I'm struck by how much of the last, 35 years since the end of the Cold War, where have we been? Not in Asia. Not in Europe. Yeah. It's in the Middle East, beginning with the Gulf War. Yeah. Then you had the war of choice that was the Iraq War, the expansion of Afghanistan, other things, Libya, Syria. It is remarkable. So here again, where are we? We are back in the Middle East. And right now, what's so interesting to me, one last point, this war began 10 days ago or so. It was Israel's initiative. Then, in the last 48 hours, America's initiative. Guess what? It's Iran in the driver's seat right now. Iran decides what's the nature of this conflict going forward. Was this a one-off? Will revenge be served cold? Will it be served hot? And how? So right now, Iran decides to what extent, what are the implications, if you will, of Donald Trump's gamble.
Jim, when you looked at the military strikes, do they strike you as effective as you expected, more so, and particularly with Fordo, which I imagine you have participated in wargaming on? What's your sense? Is it destroyed? What should we assume about it?
Can I start, if you'll permit me, by just observing this is a pretty remarkable feat of arms. This was tight OPSEC. It was precision strike. These were long flights. It incorporated the entire joint force. From all we can see, very well executed. And we ought to just take a pause and say, whether you support this strike or not, you ought to admire the young men and women who conducted it and the professionalism with which they did it. That brings us to your question, and it's really three letters, right? BDA, Battle Damage Assessment. I think as you go from the president to the Secretary of Defense and then to the uniformed chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, you see increasing levels of, shall we say, caution about declaring mission accomplished, because we just don't know yet. So over the next 2 or 3 days, we'll get a certain level of battle damage assessment based on signal intelligence, human intelligence, overhead sensors. All of that will be put together, but we won't really know the answer, I think, until we see what the Iranian package of responses look like, because that'll tell us how damaged that nuclear program is.
Richard, that gets back to your point, which is now it is the Iranians who will decide what happens next, how they respond. Do you think that they are now in kind of regime survival mode where they will focus in on that, or are they going to, do they think they're at war with the United States? What's your sense?
Potentially both. What comes to mind is 1988. When the initial Ayatollah Khomeini basically settled with Iraq, not because he wanted to, but to preserve the revolution. The question is whether, in the first instance, that's now the Iranian priority, to preserve the revolution, keep what leadership they still have intact, not spread the war, because they don't, for example, they don't want to see their oil export terminal bombed. So that might be the near-term priority. I think the more interesting thing, other than retaliation, Fareed, is reconstitution. What lessons did the Iranians draw? It's quite possible they will decide that this never would have happened had they had nuclear weapons. So I think it's possible their retaliation's relatively modest. And what they really want to do is put themselves on a trajectory where some years down the road, when there's another crisis, they're in a different position. And that's something we're going to have to think about. So this may not be quite as neat as we think. This could actually play out not just over weeks and months, but over many years.
All right, stay with us, both of you. When we come back, I want to talk about what is the regional dynamic? What are the Gulf states thinking? What is going on in Iran's allies, Russia, all of that when we come back. And we are back with Richard Haas and James Stavridis. Jim, I think we're all struck by Iran's weakness in these recent months. What are its realistic military options?
Let me start with this. We tend to underestimate the Iranian psychology. We tend to think of Iran as this kind of annoying middle-sized power, kind of always fermenting disasters in the Middle East. A lot of that's true. However, they don't see themselves that way. They see themselves as the inheritors of the Persian Empire. They have very large plans, a lot of which have been degraded significantly, almost entirely by Israel in the last 2 years. So they are weakened, but they, I think, will continue to try and find their path forward. So what are their options? Number one, they could curl up into a fetal ball and announce they're ready for negotiations. Put that down as 0% chance of occurring. Number two, Richard's point, I agree with it. Likely they will conduct some modest retaliation, try to avoid a full-scale U.S. response, and try to get that nuclear program hidden away in ways that can elude the IAEA and inspectors. Number three is the most dangerous course, and that's if they decide to go big. And we would be irresponsible not to be thinking about them making a choice like closing the Strait of Hormuz, conducting targeted assassinations, maybe not of military or political figures, but of business leaders, expats in the Middle East. They could certainly launch massive ballistic strikes against U.S. facilities, scooping up our allies and partners. And then hovering over all of it, Fareed and Richard, is, of course, could this lead to regime change? Answer, nobody knows. Certainly, you can find instances in history that look like this, that then rattle into a regime change. So I think they go with option two, as Richard and I just outlined it. But the U.S. needs to get that battle damage assessment, be ready in case the Iranians do go big. And above all, I think at this point, let's get our allies involved in this.
Richard, what do you think the regional dynamic is here? The Saudis, the Gulf states have always been foes of Iran, but now they must be watching Israel become the superpower of the Middle East and say to themselves, wait a minute, do we really want to live in an Israeli-dominated Middle East? What do you think is the dynamic?
I think they're less focused on Israel than on Iran right now, and they're of two minds. On one hand, they like Iran being cut down to size. The last thing in the world they want is an Iran nuclear capability. That would put them in the position of maybe needing one themselves. On the other hand, they're worried that they could be in the target line that Iran might decide to widen the war. It's one of the options available, and they would be the obvious choice. So I think they're uneasy, but all things being equal, probably slightly more comfortable than not with this assertion of American power, just nervous about where it goes next. I think going farther afield, Fareed, I think the Russians are probably pretty happy because this means the price of oil is going up. I think the Chinese are probably pretty unhappy, potentially for the same reason. I think who might be most unhappy are the Europeans who weren't consulted, and Democrats and others, Congress here at home. That this is, it's interesting. Donald Trump 2.0, whatever else he is, he's not isolationist. What we're seeing is a degree of unilateralism of the United States acting in the world, but essentially listening to its own trumpet, not coordinating with others.
Even the nature of the strike, the B-2s, the bases are all in America. It is a classic unilateral kind of Jacksonian move where you're saying we can do it all alone. We barely need allies.
Yeah, and that was very consistent with his press conference with the Pentagon this morning, a real demonstration, kind of triumphalism of America's ability to act. At the same time, still wanting to avoid a larger conflict with Iran. We're only going after the nuclear. We're not interested in regime change, but don't mess with us because we're playing the game at a different level.
Right. Richard Haass, Jim Stavridis, thank you. How have the strikes changed the calculus for Iran and for Israel? We'll be back with that in a moment.